everybody. Welcome to another installment of A Rebel Without Applause, coming to you from my little nutshell of infinite space right here in the Wood of the Holly under the sign. And today I have a very special and honored guest. He first came to my attention with a really terrific op-ed in the New York Times. I've come to later learn that he is the founder of Gideon's Substack. His political writings range across really a variety of platforms, including the New York Times op-ed page, Politico. He's founder of his own blog. His writings cover a host of subjects from political strategy to foreign and domestic policy to Shakespeare and movies. And he's also a filmmaker and producer himself. He's a big-time braniac, and he's here to break it down with me today. Welcome, Noah Millman. How are you?
I'm okay, thank you. I hope I can live up to that introduction.
Thanks for joining me. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So, like I said, you came to my attention, and we'll start with this fraught political moment that we're in.
Yeah.
A really excellent op-ed piece that you wrote in the New York Times about the 14th Amendment. I think it's being ignored and overridden. Just tell me why the 14th Amendment, why that op-ed, and your thinking behind it.
We've lived through several different versions of the Constitution, and that each of them was created in a way that was beyond the bounds of the Constitution itself, and therefore created by the people as a kind of constitutional founding. The first one being the writing of the Constitution itself. The folks at the Constitutional Convention were not charged with coming up with a new Constitution. They were just supposed to amend the Articles of Confederation. Instead, they said, we got a whole new form of government. The second being after the Civil War with the passage of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, particularly the 14th Amendment, which were only enacted into the Constitution because the southern states that had rebelled were under military occupation.
Yeah, I mean, we could talk about that in more detail because they were under military occupation, but had the people who had voted been allowed to vote, it wouldn't have included the majority of people that were slaves and disenfranchised.
Absolutely. And that's part of why those amendments were passed, was to prevent that from being the case.
Right. So it was almost to preserve democratic means, or to install them, they had to use military.
Absolutely. If you had gone through the normal legal processes and followed everything the way things were set up prior to this moment, you wouldn't have gotten this passed. Therefore, you had to go outside of what you would say is outside the law for the purpose of defending democracy and refounding the Constitution.
That is the American Revolution, really, 13, 14, and 15. It was an unfulfilled promise. Maybe till Brown v. Board, it starts to get actualized. The current moment that we're in, you could view it as assault on Reconstruction amendments, the New Deal, and the Civil Rights Movement, these three big platforms. The whole MAGA, Make America White Again, to me, is really an assault on those three periods of social progress.
Yeah, I certainly think there are people in the world of MAGA who look at the world that way. I think there's actually a lot of currents in play there. And what the most recent piece for the Times was about was thinking about what Trump is doing to enhance executive power as potentially a fourth constitutional moment, and what the implications of that, would be. And I really wrote it more than as a piece written to liberals to say, hey, ring the alarm bells, because I think everyone's alarm bells are ringing already. It was really written more to what I guess I'd call a moderate conservative audience, was who my imagined audience was, to say, look, you're not wrong that sometimes the Constitution has undergone dramatic shifts and changes, and it hasn't always been through the Supreme Court. This is different in certain ways from previous moments. The acid test of whether this is a refounding of the Constitution or the destruction of it is, what are you leaving behind in terms of the structure of democracy? If all this is a power grab by one individual to say, I want all the power for myself, I get to decide, I get the power of the purse, I'm taking it away from Congress. I get to decide what the Constitution means. I can ban birthright citizenship, even though there's a long the history of jurisprudence and legislation, taking a different perspective. I get to decide. I am effectively a dictator in the literal sense of the word, that I dictate what the law is, whether I'm elected or not, whether I abide by elections or not. When I'm in power, I am the dictator. If that's what the goal is, then the goal is to get rid of the Constitution, right? That's not a constitutional system. A system where one person has all the power and whatever they say is law is not a constitutional system by definition. So what is the vision of the Constitution? You people who have, manned the Federalist Society for all of these years and beat the drums for the notion that the Constitution has a fixed meaning that you can only determine by really studying it. Well, okay, what is that vision in the wake of all this? And that's the challenge that I'm sort of putting to them. We're going to see whether the Roberts Court, which has been very friendly to executive power in a lot of ways, whether they're going to be so friendly that they will allow a raft of precedents and established norms to be overridden, or whether they're going to draw a line. And if they draw a line, what happens then? If there are a bunch of 7-2 or 8-1 decisions or even 6-3 decisions coming down from the Supreme Court saying no, no, no to various things Trump tries to do, and he then defies the court, what happens? We don't know.
Well, I'm Jewish. I grew up in a moment where my mother was born in Berlin, and it was a baby refugee, and my neighbors were the survivors, their parents from Auschwitz. They had the parties with the numbers on the arms. I remember very distinctly. I grew up seeing a ton of movies, from The Dirty Dozen to The Young Lions, about fascism and Americans beating back Germans and Japanese and tyranny. I read every book, saw all the documentaries from the concentration camps, ruminated on the rise of fascism and putsches. And I feel like it's happening right now, right here. And all I got to stand up against it is this little podcast. I've been having concentration camp nightmares where I've been incarcerated in various Arbeit macht frei installations over the last few weeks. My generation, and probably yours, basically was trained in the shadow of those events. I'm asking you in less legalistic terms, how are you reacting? What do you feel?
How do I answer that? My father's side of the family came over, at the end of the 19th, early 20th century. My mother came over after the war. She was born in 1944. For most of my life, and for most of her life, what she understood was that her parents were from Warsaw, and that they'd spent the war in hiding, and that she was born in hiding. And it was only when she was almost 50 that she learned that this was not true, that in fact they had made their way east to the Soviet sector at the outbreak of the war, and were deported eastward to a labor camp not in Siberia, but near Siberia on the White Sea. And she was born in the Soviet Union, and then they made their way back after the war. All of my grandmother's family were murdered. Most of my grandfather's family, he has 2 brothers who survived. So I grew up obviously with a strong consciousness of this history, but I have always been averse to Holocaust Judaism. I've always been somebody
there's Reform, there's Orthodox, there's Conservative, and there's Holocaust Judaism. It's a new
yes,
sect.
there is. There is. It's not a new sect. It is in many ways. I know a lot of people for whom that the trauma of the Holocaust is the center of their Jewish identity, and I always rejected that. I always rejected the idea that that's what Judaism fundamentally was, that's what the Jewish experience fundamentally was. I always was drawn to the questions of how to live, and not who wants to kill you.
Well, it's sort of this race to victimhood too. It permeates our current moment. We can touch on it, but this Gaza thing is almost between the Israelis and the Palestinians. It's this race for victimhood. Some of that's rooted, I think, in obviously the Holocaust experience, but I
think that's true. I don't think it is exclusive to that, but I don't like a politics of victimhood for anybody. really. I don't think it's a healthy politics. I don't think it's a healthy way to build an identity. That doesn't mean that historical injustices aren't important to know about. They are important to know about.
Right, of course.
I've always been averse to rooting my identity or to anyone rooting their identity in that. A friend of mine said to me that she's getting, frustrated with a number of people who are engaged in Holocaust cosplay, who perceive this moment largely in terms of fantasies of their own persecution. And by that, I don't mean that the possibility of, truly horrible things happening should be dismissed. It shouldn't be. But I have the same real wariness and the same discomfort with that kind of response, with exactly what you were talking about of like, nightmares of being, herded into a camp. There are people who right now, right, are being, grabbed in the middle of the night and put on planes and buses and whatever. And
Right.
There are people being shipped to Guantanamo. They don't look like you and me.
No.
They're not in our position. And I think that it's worth keeping an eye on what is actually happening and what seems likely to happen or the risks happening. That's focusing on the present more than on the past. That's me, where I emotionally go. As far as the sort of it couldn't happen here, now it's happening here thing, I also never really bought into the nightmare version of American history or the sort of dream version of American history. Like, the kind of rhetoric that in different ways presidents like Ronald Reagan and Barack Obama engaged in that, talk about America as, this beautiful story of liberty and diversity and, these sorts of things, I know, and honestly, they knew that that's only part of the story. And by the same token, the notion that this is a country that is, birthed in sin and, was founded on, genocide and slavery and so forth is also not a complete story. But I think there are beautiful and deeply meaningful and idealistic and humanistic currents that are very powerful in human history, and there are much darker currents that are powerful in human history, in American history, I should say. And it's worth acknowledging both and recognizing that they're both always there. We're not ever going to extirpate the things that we don't like. It's all part of us. It's all part of our inheritance. And the current moment is tapped into some dark stuff. This thing of darkness, we have to acknowledge ours, and yet not thereby become paralyzed and incapable of imagining or building something better than that.
What I would say is I wouldn't have wanted to been running around in America with the Taney Court, Supreme Court, and the Dred Scott decision, and what a nightmare hellscape would have been in the United States and a black person then. But hundreds upon hundreds of thousands of people marched willingly and thrillingly in the 1860s to their death so that a few could own slaves. At the same time, hundreds of thousands marched and died so that they wouldn't be slaves. And neither side has really gone away. They're still here. And you can't fully defeat one or the other, although certain sides seem to be in the ascendancy at this moment. My thing about Section 14 was the 14th Amendment was Section C, which said if you brought a gun to a football game, guess what? You couldn't play. If you choose bullets over ballots, guess what? You can't get in the game. And
what's the line from The Big Lebowski? This isn't like Nam. There are rules.
Yeah, exactly. And they're there, in, like you said, or just inferred, that particular section isn't that arcane. You don't need a legal degree or been a Harvard professor to understand it. It was written to be understood in its moment. And if it was just they felt for the Civil War, they could have passed the law. But when you put it in a constitution, you're really saying, no, it's for this and for all time. And so there it was. And basically it got run over a year ago like a very shallow speed bump. And here we are.
Here's my view on that. If the court's going to defer to anyone on what the Constitution means, they should be deferring to Congress, because that's who gets elected by the people. That's that's who is accountable to the people. That's through whom the people speak. And Congress didn't in any substantial way enforce that section of the 14th Amendment against the Confederates themselves. They did it a little bit, but it was sporadic. It was not comprehensive. And since then, with Trump specifically,
well, there's
after
also
January 6th,
a presidential pardon, Andrew Johnson. So
correct. After January 6th, President Trump was impeached and was not convicted. He was acquitted. And I think that was a catastrophe. I think that the arguments that a number of Republicans made at the time, including Mitch McConnell, that, oh, this is something the courts should deal with, were emphatically wrong. I think they were wrong on the merits. I also think they were wrong on the law. And I think it was purely an act of cowardice on their parts. People who absolutely believed he was guilty and did not want him ever to be in politics again voted to acquit because they thought someone else would deal with it. But what really that meant was acquitting him of precisely that restriction in Section C. That's my view, is that he was effectively charged with insurrection and acquitted. And to then say, okay, well, what we want is the courts to say, no, that doesn't matter. He's banned from running, I think is giving the courts power that they don't really have. When someone has been chosen by their party to be their nominee, and there's been a process where the people have spoken and said, we don't have a problem with this, for the courts to say, well, we have a problem, I think puts the courts under an unreasonable threat. Their own credibility makes it impossible for them to ban him from running. The Republican Party was who needed to.
Well, it's after the fact, so it's moot, obviously.
Yeah.
But I think I would disagree with you because there's certain prohibition. You know, if you're 27 and you got elected or picked, there's very clear provisions in the Constitution that say, no, you got to be 35. You can't do that.
But there's not going to be a evidence. Nobody's going to come forward and say I was declared 35 by Congress. You know what I mean? Like there's not, what I mean? Like there's not going to be debate about it. The facts won't be disputed.
There are constitutional provisions that don't actually always yield to the popular will. It was there, it was clear, and an acquittal in an impeachment isn't the same stand. It's not like you're not guilty. It's a political expression. There was no, how would I say? There was no penalty other than you can't run again. It's not like he would have been incarcerated.
But that's the only penalty under. But that's the only penalty under Section C, also.
Right, but when you
it's the same thing.
But when you say
it's the same penalty,
the impeachment, the fact that they failed to convict on an impeachment, he was impeached. They failed to convict for the second time. Didn't exonerate on the other side. That's all. It didn't mean that all of a sudden that section in 14 didn't matter. That's what I would say.
I think, well, I don't agree. I think that is, as a practical matter, I think
we can still be friends. We can still be friends, Noah.
Good. I'm glad.
Please, we can still be friends. We have to find a way.
If someone, it is very hard to be friends with somebody who cannot be friends with someone who they disagree with, because we're all always going to disagree about things. I don't think there's anyone on the planet who I agree with on everything. I'd be really alarmed if I met such a person.
Good. Well, I just felt like there was section staring at me. I did a number of podcasts about it, I think with Kermit Roosevelt, the third, who was the Constitution scholar, this guy, Mark Graber, Manisha Sinha. We all talked about it. We were more like the chorus.
I think that the case that he committed insurrection and should not have been allowed to run is very easy to make. Yeah. But the question is, who gets to make that case? And
then you have to have a finding of fact.
But the court wasn't going to do that. The fact is that questions at this level are always political. Questions at a constitutional level are always political.
Of course.
And the reason that you have, a court, as opposed to just saying, well, we'll just let Congress decide everything, right, is part of the checks and balances of the American system is designed to slow down action. It is designed to require more in the way of consensus, more in the way of consensus across space and across time for really radical action to take place. That's the whole purpose of the design. If not, you could have had a unicameral legislature and no written constitution and said, whatever you pass, that's the law. And that would be a democracy, and it would have something of a constitution. You'd have to have some kind of electoral system that they wrote. If you look at the state of Israel doesn't have a written constitution. They have a number of basic laws that they've passed, but they're just passed, by the Knesset. The United Kingdom does not have a constitution. They have a set of norms and precedents, but Parliament could override those if they felt like it. The American system is designed, for better or worse, with a lot of veto points. And the purpose of it is to make sure that there has to be some degree of consensus for things to move forward. In moments of crisis, that can cause a problem. I think that Trump himself is a crisis, but has also taken advantage of that sense that he has created of there is a crisis. And he didn't create it out of nothing. I mean, the country wouldn't be susceptible if there weren't a feeling already there to be taken advantage of. But he, not wrongly, looks at this system and says, this system is designed to stop me from doing what I think needs to be done. Let's get rid of that.
Yeah, it's frustrating if you're a dictator. You have the founders who built this architecture of separation of powers, which is really their genius. And then you have like the Reconstruction Amendments, which all of a sudden they wait a minute, this whole liberty idea, we got to kind of try and enshrine that and see if we can make that work. Like there's something going on about equality. Maybe we can make that work. Those are 13, 14, and 15. Then you get to the 20th century. You describe yourself as a mugwump. Somewhere I read that. My favorite mugwump with Noah Millman.
The mugwumps were former Republicans who switched sides to support Grover Cleveland,
right?
Because they were disgusted at Republican corruption.
Right.
And since I've over the course of my life, I've migrated from center left to center right, sort of wandered around a little bit on the spectrum. And I've always been somebody who's very willing to listen to and take seriously people with more radical perspectives than I have. Like I read people who are pretty darn far right. I read people who are pretty darn far left. I've always been much more of a middle of the roady kind of guy, even when I've been more on the left or on the right. I don't rule stuff out of bounds in terms of what I'll interact with. But there was a period, I think, in the second Bush term when I decided, what am I? I think I'm a mugwump, because I'm a guy who had been on the center right, and I was like, I'm definitely, supporting the Democrats at this point, and this is part of why. And it stuck.
Let me ask you a question. I got friends that are, in the more Orthodox Jewish community, and they seem like they're in lockstep with the Donald Trump version of the Middle East. They're like one issue sort of people. And you mentioned, I don't know where I read it, was maybe in the Substack, that there's really a trap there for Israel. I'll just lay this out and then I want you to respond. When I was a kid, there was no greater existential threat to this little socialist country there in the Middle East with the kibbutz, this holy underdog of Israel. There was no more existential threat than the big Egyptian army staring at them across the Suez Canal. They fought wars in 48 and 56 and 67 and 73. And the common refrain, you cannot make a deal with the animals. They are animals. You cannot make a deal with the Egyptians. They are animals. There's no way. You cannot make a deal. They did. It still holds in not only Egypt, but the Jordan. It's still held. But I'm old enough to remember when there was no more existential enemy to the Israeli project than the standing armies of Egypt and also the others. And now, we've got this festering issue that's never been resolved since the founding of the state with the Palestinians. Neither peoples are going anywhere. They did it with the Egyptians. They can do it with the Palestinians. When it rains on a Palestinian, it rains on an Israeli. You can't make peace with friends. You got to make peace with your enemies. Figure it fucking out. And that's my feeling.
So how long is this conversation supposed to be?
Yeah, tomorrow.
Right. You decided like, okay, we've solved all the problems of American politics.
We haven't.
In the next 15 minutes, we should be able to solve the
let's figure out this Middle East and move on to movies, which is more fun, okay?
I don't think I can do justice to my views on this subject in a short time. But what I think is fair to say is that the prospects for any kind of peaceful resolution have never seemed worse to me than they do now. I think the sincere views of people on both sides have never been further apart than they are right now. And so it's easy to say, well, you got to work it out. I don't think there's much prospect for that. And that's a terrifying thought. I was incredibly heartened when the previous government of Israel, for the first time in Israel's history, included a non-Zionist Arab party. So there'd always been, earlier in the state, there were sort of puppet Arab parties that were controlled by, the Labor Party, and so forth, that were included in Israeli governments. But there was never one that was an actual popular, rooted in its own community party included in Israeli government. And for the first time, it was. Israel has to reckon with the fact that the land of Israel and the land of Palestine are the same place, that both peoples have a perfectly legitimate claim, that on some level they both have a claim to the entirety of the area. And if they don't want to live together in a single state, then they have to live together in two states that have a reasonably healthy relationship with each other and figure out how to get to that point. That is something Israel has to reckon with. It's something that the Palestinian population has to reckon with. I don't think either people believes that right now. I think right now they both, the level of hate is so high and the level of hurt is so high that what they really want is for magically the other side to cease to exist. And that's the trap, I think, of the stuff that Trump has been saying, by saying, well, America's going to take over Gaza and we're going to take all the people out and we're going to rebuild it into, something like Dubai, and then everything will be wonderful. It's not going to happen. But the mere fact that he's articulating that fantasy and saying, well, I'm ready to make it happen. Like, if you guys can get your shit together, I'm ready to do it. Right. The people who really want to believe that fantasy now can latch onto that and say, it's not a fantasy. The president of the United States said it. This is totally doable.
Magical thinking is sort of like a disease on probably both sides in certain sectors of both sides. That's why I think, well, I don't think
the president of the United States engages in it, though, it has an impact on the world.
Absolutely. But he's a big magical thinker. I mean, he's a magical thinker, whether it's Greenland or the Gulf of America, or, he renamed the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America, and the rest of the world renamed the United States as Holistan, so it's he's a magical thinker. I mean, we're not going to resolve this, but I did appreciate Thomas Friedman's book, Jerusalem to Lebanon, or Beirut to Jerusalem.
Beirut to Jerusalem, yeah.
Yeah.
That was a while ago.
But it seems like not much has changed. Some fundamentals are still very much there. And I couldn't help but recall that the greatest of all the Zionists, arguably, Ben-Gurion, realized you couldn't have a democracy and all the land and be an Israeli state. You had to pick 2 out of 3. You couldn't get all 3. That was realistic thinking in the moment. I don't necessarily think that calculus has changed. You said it very clearly a moment ago. And somehow the magical thinking of river to the sea on both sides is magical. Nobody's going anywhere. Israel as a state is one of the miracles of the 20th century. Why did the Israelis get a state and the Palestinians failed? Because the Israelis got organized. They lobbied all these foreign governments in the years after World War I. And when the moment came, they were ready to defend it and create it. And the Palestinians weren't, for whatever reason. And there is history in the making and a conflict that's yet to be resolved. So I don't know. That's just my thinking.
Well, I'm glad we resolved that.
Did we resolve it? Well, let's just get real. Get real. That's all.
Yeah.
You or me.
I have a script called that.
Get real.
I have a script called Get Real.
How's it going?
It's big. I mean, I think it's a good script. I wrote it, but I don't know what to do with it. It's a perpetual question of mine, is what do you do with a script? Because when I finished college, I wanted to be a novelist and started working on a novel and didn't get very far, and then got a day job that turned into a career and wound up working on Wall Street for 16 years.
Ow!
Yeah. Yep.
Go ahead.
Yeah. And then I quit after the financial crisis. And at that point, most of the ideas I had felt more like movies than like books. And I also knew that screenplays were shorter. And so I took the screenwriting sequence at NYU and then started writing, and then started trying to sell a script, not really knowing how to do that. And in the course of that, wound up, I still
Tell me how. Help me.
And in the course of that, I got connected to this production company in New York called Paper Street Films. So I had a short film that I wanted to see made. And I said, Danny, if you want to direct this, or you know anyone who wants to direct it? And they're like, why don't you direct it? And I said, I don't know anything about directing. They said, well, director is the only job you don't need to know anything to do, which is not true.
You point the camera at the people who are talking. That's the first rule.
No, because the action is on the person who's not talking.
Okay.
We can hear the person talking. We point at the other person. How do they react to the person talking?
Mike Nichols knew that.
I love that. Yeah, exactly. I was just thinking of the scene, the tennis match in Carnal Knowledge.
Great movie.
Right, where we're on...
on Anne Margaret, who's sitting and watching.
Anne Margaret, thank you.
And Jack's playing tennis with the hot...
Correct. With exactly.
And she's going...
Right.
Boom, boom, boom. Yeah.
Yep. And you don't see the two players at all. You hear them, and you see Anne Margaret, the whole scene, and it just plays out.
I did that in my movie.
It's one of my favorite scenes.
Well, that's one of my favorite movies.
Ah, I love
Period.
that film.
My favorite line in the movie is when Garfunkel and Jack are sitting there, and the sensitive one, Garfunkel, says, well, he's talking about his marriage and the difficulty.
Right.
And Garfunkel says, looks aren't everything. And Nicholson looks at him and goes, looks are everything. I love that line.
But right. I mean, the film is mocking and satirizing both of them. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it is a brutal, excruciating takedown of the male. It's a tough watch. I've watched it many times. I would watch it again in a heartbeat. It's a tough watch, though.
Jules Pfeiffer.
You know what was interesting?
Jules Pfeiffer.
He wrote it. He originally wrote it as a play, and then adapted it into a screenplay. And I read the screenplay. I was like, oh my God, I can see the panels. He could have written it as a comic strip, and it would have worked perfectly. It reads like that. And reading Jules Pfeiffer's script was an eye-opener because there's so little visual in it. There's almost no description of action, almost no description of anything. You know, he tells you where you are, and then the characters talk to each other, and you can still see it. And I mean, maybe that's because I've already seen the movie.
Maybe you've seen the movie. It's bullshit artist, bullshit artist, bullshit artist.
No.
So that's the movie. That's the line when the two guys are talking, and he calls them bullshit artist.
Yeah.
I love
it. What a great film. So anyway, I set out to direct my first feature, couldn't get it off the ground, wrote another feature. That became my first feature film that I directed in 23, and which we are now in the process of trying to start our festival run, applying places. And it's called Resentment. And I wrote it, I aimed for it to be a kind of early Mike Nichols picture. Like I was very much inspired by Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. The solar opposites. There we go.
Yeah, it's my movie. It's a good movie. Warner Brothers acquired it. It stars Chris Maloney, Timothy Busfield from 30-something, and beautiful actress Janelle Maloney, who was well-known on West Wing. Yeah, I wrote and directed it. It's all true except for the happy parts, which I added. It was in theaters. Nice reviews.
Are you happy with it?
Yeah. Yeah, it's great. It's a great movie. I mean, I have my certain thoughts about it that make me sad when I see it.
You have watched it since it's been done, right? You've not...
On a few occasions, yeah. I mean, it's been... Yeah. I've seen it.
What's it like? Like the feeling of watching your own thing once it's all done, once there's no more, like it's no longer in process. Like it's different if you're in the edit, you know, if they're still making changes. Well, what's it like when it's all done for you watching?
Well, it's like if you're in a play or working on a theater piece, the last piece of information you get about what you did is the audience.
Mm-hmm.
And the audience tells you about your movie or your play, or as in my case, as a stand-up comedian, if something's funny.
Right.
You get laughs. And so...
But if you're on stage, you can adapt at that moment to some degree.
But there's...
You can't if you're sitting in the audience watching a movie.
No, but the more you play the more you play the movie, the actors get more and more relaxed, and they start to really inhabit it. The more plays the film gets. No, I'm kidding. You know, it's it can be whatever it is. It can be massively deflating. A movie could not work. Things you hoped were amusing aren't. People fall out of it. You can watch people leave. In my case, it was thrilling. It was wonderful.
And still is every time you see it?
I don't watch it much. I encourage people to watch it, but I don't watch it. It's not for me anymore. It's for the public. You could see it tonight. You know, you could download it. My movie, when I watch it, it's a mixed thing. because it's a
Uh-huh.
beautiful movie. Some of the things that you and I just talked about in terms of carnal knowledge, the things that are, you could see those influences, Mike Nichols and The Graduate and things, some movies that were really meaningful to me. And I'm so proud of it aesthetically, but it makes me sad because my movie is inspired out of my own experience.
Hmm.
And it's a younger guy that's no longer there. That's not me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so time has passed and I'm different. And so there's some melancholy associated with that. And then there's also what lives with me more than the creative journey of the movie is the war that it took for me to get it exhibited in theaters commercially, to get through that aperture of the marketplace, which I did.
Hmm.
It was a brutal one. And I had to endure a lot of rejection at a lot of levels. I'll tell you one story. I was not included in Sundance, which was brutal at the time because that's basically where movies were marketed for, American independent movies. When I say independent,
Right.
I don't mean co-opted by some of the companies at the time, but I mean entrepreneurial. So I went to Sundance and I showed my film in the basement of hotels. I had video projection at the time. I've somehow managed to score that. And I created my own film festival called Soul Dance because my movie is called Polar Opposite. And I crashed in the press rooms. I remember seeing this woman, the Sundance press rooms, following Michael Moore, the famous documentarian. And I said, "Hey,
Uh-huh.
how are you?" And she goes, "Hi." I go, "Do you know about Soul Dance?" She goes, "No." I go, "Well, it's the most exclusive festival in Park City. Only one movie got in. Do you know about it?" She goes, "No." I go, "It's the Solar Opposite. You should see it." I go, "What's your name?" And she goes, "I'm Janet Maslin."
That's a good story.
I'm not done.
That's a good
So,
scene.
yeah. So, for those who don't know, Janet Maslin at that time was the lead critic of the New York Times. She reviewed the biggest and most important movies that came down the pike. And I said, "Oh, that's cool." And I said, "Check out my movie. Here's the flyer. It's playing in the basement, you know." Well, she didn't come. A couple days later, I crashed again, fake ID, into the press room. And there she is. And I said, "Janet." She goes, "What is it?" I go, "If you want to talk to me, just come up to me. But this following me around, it's not working." And she looks at me and smiles. I go, "You want to see the movie? Just come." Well, she goes, "Well, I'm very busy." I said, "Okay, here." I handed her a cassette. So that was that. And I did my little thing. I couldn't get a deal. No,
Right.
I had people that came in really liked the movie, but later I
Hmm.
got, foreign sales and, DVD stuff. And I got a really
Yeah.
nice review in the trade papers from the AFI Fest. Nobody cared then. So a year goes by. I finally get my movie in the theaters because I made a deal with the Lemleys myself. I said, "I'll book this fucking movie. Let's make it work." And I had a trailer that was really good and a cut for television and had a little money to spend. And my movie ended up opening in LA to really good reviews in LA Times and everything. I had a limited run. Finally, I got play dates at Feast in New York. You know where that is, right?
Sure. Been there many times.
Ironically, I just do a little story. The Village East used to be the Intermedia
Yeah.
Theater,
Yeah.
which was
Yeah.
prior to that the Yiddish Art Theater, Maurice Schwartz. And they made a movie there years ago, a really funny movie called Night They Raided Minsky's. I did a play in New York called Goodnight Grandpa with Milton Berle. I played his grandson. And it was in the Intermedia
Uh,
Theater. I became very close with Milton Berle, and he encouraged me to do stand-up comedy. So anyway, years later, my movie gets play dates in New York City at the Village East. I didn't realize
right.
it, but when I got there, I go, "This is the Intermedia Theater." They had subdivided into cinemas.
Right.
And I said to the press person, I said, "Get my fucking film to goddamn it, to get it to Janet Maslin. She might remember me." And they did. And Janet wrote the review for my movie. And it wasn't a brilliant review, but she said,
But just the fact that it was there for sure is a
she
huge thing.
said, I forget the words, "Thank God that this movie justified his mad passion for it, my ability to be out there pushing it." And that was the review that I got. Substance, essentially the basis.
Yeah.
A movie deserved its my
Yeah.
tenacity, and that was the
It's
review. Yeah.
It's a very tough world out there, I don't claim to understand it.
One of the things I learned when they pulled my movie in New York
Mm,
is that it's really a rare privilege to be in the arena. By that I mean is theatrical distribution, to be in theaters,
yeah,
be reviewed, with the possibility that you will be ignored and panned. But that is a rare privilege in our culture. And I had to ultimately, through my tears, even though I had a really good movie, people have, liked it and loved it. I had to just sort of come to that understanding. To be in the arena is a rare privilege. And
yeah,
not a lot of people write, direct, get a movie
no,
made, and actually distribute, exhibit it. I would tell the exhibitors, come, I promise when we show the movie, I'll show up and do Q&J afterwards. I go, what's Q&J? I go, they ask a question, I'll tell a joke.
right,
Made it as entertaining as I could. These people
yeah,
went to extreme. I didn't quite have, when my movie came out, the internet as a marketing, people are still going and reading in newspapers to find movies.
sure.
It was a little bit
And it
before.
was the heyday of the DVD world. Like that was the way that movies recouped was their DVD sales
Yeah,
back then.
yeah. I had two deals. I mean, Warner Brothers eventually. I had one with this other company in Florida, and then Warner Brothers wanted it. I made a deal with Warner
Hmm.
Brothers for domestic cable, domestic
Hmm.
cable distribution, and DVD. And I was
Hmm.
really honored. My movie got acquired by Warner Brothers. None of those films at fucking Sundance
Yeah.
got jack, and mine did. And it had special meaning on a deeper level for me because my grandfather Ben Kalmanson was president of Warner Brothers and started there in 1927 and retired in 69 as president of the studio. So I had no connections. Nobody knew by that time, but that has always been very
Yeah.
powerful in my own psyche and my own sense of my own destiny as a prince in disguise in Hollywood. So,
I have no delusions that I'm a prince in disguise. I'm not going to pretend that I don't want recognition. Of course I do. But I also can't pretend that I am only interested in the work itself. That's the ideal, right? You're supposed to only care about the work. You're supposed to be like, I made the film and I'm proud of it. And that's all that ultimately matters.
movie making is I don't know, it's a brutal game. I've written
It
10
is.
screenplays, and when I see my movie, it makes me sad that I haven't really gotten another chance to direct another film
Never
uh,
say never.
up till the second. These screenplays
Yeah.
stick with you forever.
Because they haven't become themselves yet. They're
Yes,
still the plan for the thing, and there's no thing.
right. If you write a novel, there's you. I wrote a novel. There it is. Read it. If you write a screenplay, it's a request to be a movie. Now, speaking of the theater, you were involved with one of the all-time blockbusters of all time in the theater, which was Anton Chekhov's The Seagull, with Trigorin
Ah,
and Treplev and Masha
yeah,
and the whole crew of.
yeah.
It ends
That
with
was
a
a
beautiful suicide in the end. I mean, what? It's a hit.
well. That film wasn't a hit. It wasn't a flop, but it wasn't a hit.
Annette Bening.
Annette Bening, Saoirse Ronan, Corey Stoll, Elizabeth Moss, Brian Dennehy. I was on the producing team of that film. I'm not going to say I could not imagine saying a negative word about the film. I was only able to be on set a little bit. It was a joy to be there. It was a very happy set. Michael Mayer directed. Lead producers were Tom Hulse and
He's a good actor, that
Les.
guy.
He's a wonderful actor. He's also a really lovely guy.
The
Really,
hell
really
was he? Why
friendly
wasn't he in the movie, for Christ's sakes?
because he's producing now. That's what he does. Tom Hulse and Leslie Erdang were the lead producers, and it was a very happy, friendly set. It was a real. Yeah, I was only there on set for a few days, and it was a joy to be there. At the end of the day, I think The Seagull is a play, and it's something that I'm sensitive to because the script that I wrote for Resentment reads very much like a play. And multiple people who read it said, why aren't you doing this as a play? Why are you doing it as a movie? And part of the honest answer is because I want to direct a movie. Like I wrote it so that I can direct a movie. I want to direct a movie. But another part of it was that there were specific moments, not every single moment in the film, but specific moments that I saw with through the eye of the camera that I thought that's the way I want to do it. That's how to land this. I don't think it'll work that way on stage. I would have to do something different. I'm thinking of it as a movie, even though it is very play-like. It's 3 acts that are equal in size. It's almost all in one location. It's extremely dialogue driven. It's a play, but to me, it was a movie. I mean, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf is a sterling example of succeeding at doing that. That's a magnificent movie, and it absolutely was a play. 12 Angry Men is another play that was a great movie. And
Jack
again, where
Warden, I got to get to the ball game. I got to get to the ball game.
But it feels like a movie.
Doing the anger.
Yeah.
Man, Henry Fonda.
But it feels like a movie. And it feels like a movie again. The camera is used very intelligently. One of the Sidney Lumet talked about how
Sidney Lumet directed it, I believe, offhand.
Yeah. That's what I said. Sidney Lumet said that one of the part of the language of the movie is that the angle of the camera's at drops steadily over the course of the film. So that when we start out, we are above eye level. We're up here looking down on everybody. And bit by bit, we get down to eye level, and now we're even. And then bit by bit, we get lower, and we're looking up at everybody. And the angles start getting expressionist, and the ceiling starts appearing, and it looks like it's pressing down on them, and the claustrophobia gets greater. It's marvelous, and when you know about it and you watch the film, you can see it. But you don't see it if you don't know about it. You just feel it, and that's the way you're supposed to use a camera, right? It's not supposed to draw attention to itself. It's supposed to evoke something emotionally in you by being used that way. And I tried to steal that for Resentment for Act One. I was like, I want to do the same thing. We're going to start here. We're going to go here. It didn't quite work out, but for a variety of reasons.
Sidney had great respect for actors. He was out of the group theater. Yes. He was a child actor in the Yiddish theater. So he came out of a tradition that made me come to New York, Stella Adams and all that. And so he had great respect for actors and performance. Yeah. And you can see it from that movie to Dog Day Afternoon and Serpico. I mean, there's the whole slew. Nobody did New York better than Sidney Lumet, for Christ's sake.
He's a great, one of the great directors of all time. I love his stuff.
And he didn't have pretensions that he was also a writer and an artist. In other words, he was a director.
You don't think he thought of himself as an artist?
No, I mean, I cut that as a writer. In other words, he didn't.
Yeah.
He believed in the division of labor.
Yes.
In movie making. That's a problem today, I believe, in our cinema.
Absolutely. In the old days, right, you had people in charge who had an appreciation for good storytelling. They would enforce a kind of discipline. You have to write it this way. You have to, this is going to get greenlit because they knew what they were looking for. And yes, they could intervene, to change endings and things like that. But they had some story sense. My sense now is that there's not much of that. And then instead, if it's a commercial property, the considerations that are brought to bear have nothing to do with story. And as a consequence, there's a lot of just bad storytelling out there.
A lot of pretentiousness. We could name the movie.
Yeah.
One of the great skills in movie making that really is undervalued and not understood or appreciated today is producing. And I don't mean the guys that can get the money. I mean the guys.
That's important.
It is, but this is another talent of it.
Yeah,
is the guys or women that could understood good story. Story, and that talent is largely been abdicated. The studios, in and of themselves, in my view, have abdicated their core function. But the studios defer all these decisions to the agencies and to the attachments and to all this other stuff. And their core power was they had the credit lines, which meant they had the money, and they could say, we're going to make this and this and this. And now they wait to see that you cobble everything together, and but you can't unless you have the green light. So it's almost a Sisyphean kind of friggin' world that at least I found myself in.
Yeah. I don't think people really know what movies are for at this point. I mean, they don't have the place in the culture that they used to have.
You're right.
And that's technologically driven, I mean, honestly. And so we know that there's a huge amount of demand because people subscribe to Mubi and people subscribe to the Criterion channel and people like when they do revival screenings at art house cinemas, they sell out. It's not like there's no demand for going to the theater, and it's not like there's no demand for seeing, great movies. It's still there. It's still robust. I guess it isn't robust enough to support the whole ecosystem of movie making. It all makes me very, very sad in that
I'll
way.
say this, and I agree with it. What you said, I don't know, a few moments ago. Not only is there a demand for the theatrical movie experience, there is a pent up demand for the theatrical movie experience.
Mm-hmm.
Good stories, well told. I believe the people will come. Movies are still a great deal. The night out, even though they're overpriced with parking and popcorn and all the other crap. I think the system of selectivity and how they have get made has coarsened the public. I think the delivery system, okay, you can stream it and enjoy a movie, but there is still something fun and worthwhile about going to the theater. I mean, my favorite cinemas, the ArcLight, have been closed, I don't know, since 3 or 4 years now. I've done
Yeah.
jazz shows in front of the boarded up Cinerama Dome just to kind of point that out. But I still have hope. Good stories, well told. There's room for them. I don't know. I need to just to be happy. But I have
You
not
do.
written new screenplays. I have not felt I did a lot of research
Yeah.
on something that I didn't write. Maybe I will, because I don't have the kind of hopefulness that there's a place for movies, and it's hard to get people to read. For myself, I did direct one movie that I wrote, but I've written 9 others. There's 4 or 5 of them that I
Right.
think would be really good, even to this day.
I haven't given up. I mean, I'm still hoping that Resentment gets some kind of recognition, and on the back of that, then I'm able to make the next one. I have the next one ready to go. The script
So
is
Resentment
done
is
and is ready.
filmed. It's filmed.
It is filmed, cut. It's all done. The edit's long since complete, and all the post production is complete. We've submitted to 40 some odd festivals. We got rejected by Sundance. We got rejected by South by. We're waiting, to see where we do get in, where we can premiere, and where and what kind of reception it gets at the festivals that it does. The great thing about film festivals is you will definitely have an audience and you get to meet them. If you go, you're there, and all of the people who are there because of the movies, right? They're all cinephiles of one sort or another, or what are they doing at a film festival? So it's the best possible audience. And I'm really looking forward to that. That to me is an enormous privilege, to be able to share, something that meant so much to me with other people who don't know who I am, and then get to know them get to know me through the work, and me get to know them through their reaction is an enormous privilege. I'm really looking forward to it. I can't wait to find out where we start.
Get that fucker in projectors, man. Get it out.
Yeah,
Get it in
yeah,
projectors. Get the light.
yeah.
Get it out there. That's
But I haven't given up. I've got 2 other scripts that are one that is ready to go, and the other one which is a similar size. It needs more work on it, but then I'm not sure what you do with it, because
you beg people to read it. That's all you can do.
yeah,
You write something and you ask and beg, and here's
yeah,
4 words. Would you be willing? Would you be willing to read my script? Would you be willing?
yeah.
Would you be willing? Can I send you? Would you read this? You got to get people to read. Pitching is bullshit, because the selling
Yep.
document is the screenplay. Get people to read it and pray that it can find its way through the system. I noticed you mentioned in your bio you do financing, so
I had some experience with that. That's kind of over. I was raising money mostly from my old Wall Street colleagues, but there was a project that I was involved with that crashed and burned, and basically ended that effort. But more broadly, like, I don't feel comfortable putting myself in that situation again of saying, like, yeah, I believe in this project. I believe in these producers.
you shouldn't say investing. If you want to invest, go to Microsoft or go to Apple and invest. Buy
Right.
stocks. That's an investment. There's nothing in the movies, especially that's outside of the companies, that's truly an investment. It's not a good word. It's Would you like to place $100,000 on one square on a roulette wheel? That's basically the gamble.
Yeah, but I think that the people who really do this and don't mind taking the losses are doing it for some combination of believing in the art form, believing in the people involved, believing in the project specifically, and the sense of glamour and excitement of being part of the process, and all of that soft stuff. I got to hobnob with so and so, whatever. For all the films that I was raising money for before my own feature, they all had bankable casts, and so they were all pre-sellable. And so you could say, okay, look, there's risk, but we've already sold France, the Netherlands, and Italy, and we hit the sales targets for those. So you can see that there's proof of concept, or we've already got, so and so in the cast, and they're huge in Latin America. And so we've got estimates like through the roof for what the sales going to be like there. And so now you say, okay, I'm putting $100,000 into this. The odds are I'm going to lose money, but I'm not going to lose $100,000 because they've got proof that this is going to go somewhere. They're going to make the film. The film's going to be okay. It's still going to star, Zoe Saldana or something. And so it's going to get out there. And my worst case scenario is, I get this much comes from the tax credit and this much comes from foreign sales, and there's some kind of domestic distribution, and I'm going to get 70% of my money back, if the film's a turkey, and I'll get 100% of my money back if the film is good. And then there's this tiny chance that the film is great and all the stars align. I think most investors in that level of film, that's the way they go in, is they want to see the business case, and then they know it's a risky case. And it's a risky case with an expected value of losing money, but not losing that much.
And they're not going to lose so much that it hurts them, like in a casino. Like you go to a casino, I've got 100,000, 10,000 I can pay, I can lose and still have a good time. Basically, those are the people, in situations you're trying to get. I'll tell you, this guy, Sandy Howard. Sandy Howard was one of the great indie producers from Westchester County. He was a friend of my family's. He famously made a big hit called A Man Called Horse, and then a sequel with Return of a Man Called Horse. And I used to see him at the film market. Sandy Howard, he's God rest his soul. And he loved me. He knew I had some writing and acting talent. He would call me up. He'd go, Billy. He goes, it's Sandy Howard. How are you? Good. We've just secured the North Yemen video rights. The courier is in Ankara tomorrow. Be ready to work on Monday. Click. Phone hangs up. He was well past his prime at that moment. He was actually in the throes of a kind of dementia.
Oh, dear.
But I used to get these calls repeatedly, and
that's hilarious.
Yes. Be ready to work on Monday. Click. Of course, Monday came along and no phone call.
Nothing happened, right?
He had his moment in the sun, I mean, listen, I love movies. I lived them and grew up in them and fantasized about being in them. I've been in a number of movies. I'm in a movie that was won Best Picture called Argo. The last picture I did was with a woman who starred with Mike Nichols, Rita Moreno, and she was in college.
Yeah.
With Jane Fonda and Sally Field and Lily Tomlin. I'm in a movie called 80 for Brady.
Okay.
I've had some stuff.
It ain't over. It ain't over. No. It ain't over till you're 6 feet under.
Well, Noah Millman, I want to just give people a chance. Check out the Substack, Gideon's Substack. That's your platform, your blog. You're a thoughtful guy. You're a polymath covering all kinds of subjects. We didn't even get to Shakespeare.
We're going to have to do it again.
There's some great movies in Shakespeare.
Sure. I have a script. I did a film adaptation of Timon of Athens, which I think is Shakespeare's most obscure play. So it's a really good script, and no one will ever make it.
Great Shakespeare movies. I'm going to name a few that I love. Henry V, magical.
Do you like the Ian McKellen Richard III?
I like that movie. My Kingdom.
I do too. Chimes at Midnight.
Chimes at Midnight. Orson Welles, Henry IV, Henry V, and I think a little of...
It's Henry IV parts 1 and 2. I don't think he uses any of Henry V. Yeah.
And a little of Richard II kind of...
I think there might be a tiny bit, yeah.
Yeah. Richard II, I think, would be a really good... under the right hands, it could be a really good movie.
It would make a better movie in some ways than a play because it's... on stage, it's quite static.
Well, there's battles and there's wars and all kinds of. It's a coup essentially.
It is a coup. There isn't really a battle though. The battles in Ireland are off stage.
But it's a movie. We filmed the friggin' battle.
It's a movie. You could. I would go if I were doing Richard II. I would go in a different direction than that. I would go in a more of a sort of fever dream, like really close to Richard's own consciousness, hallucinatory kind of take on it.
How I may compare this prison where I live unto the world, and for the world is populous.
Yes.
And here I am. That's one of my Shakespeare in the Showers. That great
it's a great speech.
Polanski's Macbeth.
Macbeth. Yep.
Orson Welles' Othello. It's fantastic. I'll tell you a story about that. I was in Essaouira surfing. I love to surf. Which is in Morocco. It's an ancient Portuguese port with all the battlements, and I'm walking around, and there's Orson Welles Park. Oh, they shot Othello here because it was the stand-in for Cyprus.
Got it.
You know, he gets a lot of criticism for it because he's white, but I think Olivier's Othello is fantastic. And here's another movie I think is fantastic: Peter Brook's King Lear.
I haven't seen it. I've heard of it. Yeah, I've never seen it.
You've got to get it if you're into Shakespeare. I'll tell you why, and we'll just use this as the exit. King Lear, my last Shakespeare in the Shower is Edmund, you know?
Yes, I saw that one.
Okay, good. I hope you liked it. Thanks. You didn't
I did.
Oh, good. Anyway, there's not a nation state where a king would divide his kingdom up, you know, and give it to his kids or his daughters. That's a period of time that's actually before the nation state idea happens. It's in deep time. It's like way before the nation state idea is it's just my fucking kingdom, my property. We're going to divide it up here, and I'm going to go party. Okay, that's this King Lear. And what Brooks does is he really creates a time and the place that these guys are in bear robes, and you know, it's really primordial in a way.
It's caveman Lear,
Beowulfian, because but it's logical because the nation, like Hamlet, there is an idea of a nation state, and there's Poland, and there's there's Elsinore, and there's France, and Claudius would never divide up the kingdom. That would be unimaginable. But in Lear, it happens. And the thing about what Brooks does, it's believable. He creates that time and the place that, to me, gives. So when Lear is, blow wind, cracky fires, he's really in nature. He's fucking naked, and it's believable in the context. It's not like he's taking off collars and robes and all this. No, it's a bear rug, and there you are. So that's a great movie. I recommend it. Anyway, we could go on forever. I'm interested in
We could.
Israel and the Bible and Shakespeare. I know you're working on something there. You were a big-time braniac. You're living in the tradition of all the great Jewish thinkers, Maimonides, Spinoza, Martin Buber, and now Noah Millman. Here we are, ladies and gentlemen, breaking it down with yours truly. Check out Gideon's Substack. It's worth it.
Hope they do.
I've been getting the missives and reading the articles, and I appreciate it. And you, thanks for hanging.
I appreciate you having me on. This has been a delight.
Look out for Noah's movie. It's coming down the pike. It's called
Resentment.
Hold on to your resentment. It's coming soon. Till next time. Namaste, shalom, and aloha. By that I mean, namashaloha. See you.